So roll call, let the roll call show that all 5 regular board members are here. The student board members are not present right now. These final week coming up, so we understand that they're busy and they're not required to be at this meeting today. Before we get to the approval of the agenda, let me note that this agenda, around the same time today, Nellie and I both discovered that the agenda was in the format of a regular board meeting instead of a special session. So that's why you see public comment in 3.0. But in fact, public comment belongs after 4.1. So between 4.1 and 4.2 is where public comment would occur, should any members of the public wish to speak. So with that, and without further ado, we ask for approval of the agenda as revised or corrected, or however you want to say it.
Second.
Do I have a motion? Sanjay, seconded by Catherine. Any discussion? All in favor, please signify by raising your hand or saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries 5-0. Thank you. We are now ready for our study session meet, or if you're a vegan, the veggies. Ellie, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. I had to think about that. All right. Well, first of all, welcome and thank you all for your participation today. I wanted to thank you not only for your participation, but for the work that you have done and will continue to do to bring ethnic studies to our students next year. I also wanted to thank the Board of Education for approving the course. And so that being said, we are now in the process of reviewing the materials and wanted to just remind us all and those that are listening that we did already present units 1 through 3. And so today is our opportunity to hear about units 4 through 7. So we really look forward to hearing more about that as well. And also, as this is a study session, there will be no formal action that will take place today. This is really an opportunity for all of us to listen, to ask clarifying questions for the information of all. And for those who are interested who are not here, we will share that this is recorded and that also the comments that you all make, we are making note of and will then take back to staff for really discussion and consideration. And so with that, I would like to introduce our Associate Superintendent, Terry Fott of Ed Services, who's going to share some information about the process and the progress.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Meyer. This is just a reminder of the process and requirement of Assembly Bill 101. And for course approval, we need to have as a district a first reading. And as Dr. Meyer said, this is part 2 of our first reading, 1 through 3 units in April, and then units 4 through 7 today. And the board is to make the final approval at a subsequent board meeting, and that's our June 5th board meeting. Boarding in progress.
Sorry,
In addition, we do have public comment that is posted on the homepage of our website in the form of a Google form with the lessons also open for preview. This will close on June 1st, and it has been open. I didn't write the date down, but a few weeks. It's been open for at least 3 weeks now. Lastly, we have, in my opinion, gone above and beyond what Assembly Bill 101 has asked of us for course approval. We have done a thorough and comprehensive review of the ethnic studies framework and the lessons that have been designed and created by what continues to show each and every time this group meets and presents and talks, highly qualified educators in our classrooms as the founders of this ethnic studies course. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to them to start our review.
And just a question, how many comments have we received?
Oh, thank you for that. We currently have 7 comments in the public comment field. Anything from open-ended, just broad comments to some specifics. And part of 101 requirement is that we do post public comment for our public, and that will be posted after we close on June 1st.
Thank you.
Or June 5th. Thank you.
Thank you.
And with that said, Nate, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
All right, it's great to be here again with you folks. And just to remind anybody who's listening in, my name is Nate Bowen. I'm the department coordinator at Mountain View High School. So on behalf of the social studies department for both Mountain View and Los Altos, I just want to say how proud we are of this team and of the course that they've developed. I just wanted to quickly remind the board about the intentionality that went into the design of this course, since we finished off with presenting the first 3 units in the first semester. The first semester is really devoted to building that community and that comfort amongst the students so that they feel good talking with the teacher about these difficult topics. It also would give them the content knowledge and the vocabulary so that they have that analytical lens to then get into more current events. And that is what the second semester is then devoted to. So a lot of thought was put into kind of like the narrative arc of this course, setting the stage, if you will, to give students that comfort, that community, that sense of ownership in the class, so that then they can really sink their teeth into some of the issues going on around this topic in current events. And that's what you're going to be hearing from our teachers about today for those units 4, 5, 6, and 7. One thing I just want to comment on briefly is that these teachers, this team, have really put a lot of effort into creating an ethnic studies course. And towards that end, they've used a lot of resources, they've used a lot of ideas, but they've really made a course that is for Mountain View, Los Altos. And one of the resources that we used to help design this course was the Ethnic Studies Model Curriculum that was adopted by the California State Board of Education, March 2021. So in this very long document, you get kind of like you get offered a prescription of what an ethnic studies class should be. And so I'm just going to read briefly what the Board of Education has delivered to us and what we really tried to create. And as you will listen to this and hear, it's a pretty difficult challenge creating a course like this. So this is from page 14, Why Teach Ethnic Studies in a K-12 Environment? And this is quoted from the model curriculum. Ethnic studies helps bring students and communities together. This does not mean glossing over differences, avoiding difficult issues, or resorting to cliches about how we are all basically alike. It should do so by simultaneously doing 3 things. Now listen to this. This is tough to meet these 3 things simultaneously. 1, addressing racialized experiences and ethnic differences as real and unique. 2, building greater understanding and communication across ethnic differences. And 3, revealing underlying commonalities that can bind by bringing individuals and groups together. So just, even reading that again, I'm like, wow, that is a challenging mandate from the state. So as you're listening to these units, I would just offer that this team has really worked hard to meet that difficult challenge. I think they've done beautifully, and I'm proud of the course they've created, and I'm excited to hear them speak as well. So thank you very much for your time. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Yit, who's going to go into Unit 4.
Great, thank you, Mr. Bowen, and thank you Board of Trustees and our district's leadership again for the opportunity to present about the studies class in the 2nd semester. For those that may be listening in, my name is Julie Gitt. I'm currently serving as our MBLA Ethnic Studies District Lead and one of the social studies teachers at Mountain View High School. So I'll begin with Unit 4 and the overview of this unit on immigration and migration. I think it was a really engaging unit for our students. We'll be sharing more from our student survey data about some of their perspectives on the unit. You have, of course, the complete list of essential questions and learning objectives in our curriculum framework. Just to highlight a couple of those, in this unit, we're exploring with students what are some of the complex experiences of diverse immigrant communities, how policies, laws, and systems of power influence the experiences of immigrant communities throughout history and today, as well as exploring how immigrants have transformed this country in diverse ways that we'll speak to more in a moment. And so in the curriculum framework that you have reviewed on multiple occasions, we have our learning objectives, which are aligned to those essential questions. And on this next slide, you see a roadmap of the unit, and we'll pull out some of those pieces to talk about in more depth shortly. But just the overview is that we begin by helping students to understand some of the reasons that people immigrate. So we examine push and pull factors. This provides a nice introduction into their U.S. history courses, their junior year. We also start to explore diverse testimonials and stories of different immigrants from many countries around the world. Then we begin to explore waves of migration to the Bay Area. So specifically, how different immigrant groups have come to this area and really enriched our communities. Then an analysis of important historic immigration laws that we'll talk about in more detail. And then a piece that I think the students have really enjoyed in learning about modern immigration laws and programs such as DACA and Title 42. And then we wrapped up this unit with a Socratic seminar that gave students the opportunity to really discuss and draw on the evidence and different, stories they have learned over the course of the semester. And similar to all of our units, I just want to emphasize again that we are continually focused on strengthening students' academic skills in ways that are aligned to the California History, Social Studies standards and Common Core Skills standards. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Catherine Orozco.
Hello, everybody. My name is Dr. Catherine Orozco. I teach at Los Altos High School.
Sorry. Do you want to ask questions? No, I'm sorry. I should have said that they have requested that they do their entire presentation. Okay. First, so that was my fault. I should have announced that up front.
Okay. So thank you so much for clarifying. So one of the pieces of feedback that we got from the community was to not only focus on oppression and to really look at the empowerment of different groups of individuals from different backgrounds, different identities. And so we really heard that, and one of the activities or several activities from the immigration unit was to look at the contributions that immigrants have made in our American society. Okay, and this didn't only focus on cultural aspects or social aspects, but we looked at technology. We also looked at STEM, religion, and different types of contributions, even political contributions that they've done in the Bay Area or throughout our nation. And so as you see, this is one of the examples that we looked at with our historical assignments, looking at the push and pull factors of why the different groups of people have come to the U.S. And as you see, we looked at different groups. We looked at Japanese immigrants and also Chinese immigrants and the legislation that was associated with that, any types of exclusion or restrictions to those immigration acts. So looking at the origins of those push and pull factors and how that led to different types of legislation.
Great, thank you, Catherine. And so building on that, the Socratic seminar at the end of the unit provided a really excellent opportunity for students to apply their knowledge. And we focused on those three central questions. In regards to the first one, students learning about policies and laws, it was just awesome to see the students in action in the Socratic seminar. They were reflecting and bringing in evidence about, for example, the Chinese Exclusion Act, the 1920s quotas, kind of the contrast between the era of Mexican repatriation and the Bracero program, which really highlights how students are examining ways in which immigration policies at times restrict immigration or provide more opportunities. And then the transformative effect of the 1965 Civil Rights Act. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the students loved learning about some of the current issues related to immigration because they may have experience with this with their families or their friends and community, or just seeing like news online or social media posts about the border. And so during the time we were teaching this unit, there was a lot going on with Title 42, debates about whether or not Title 42, the border would be lifted. Students were really engaged learning about DACA, or the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals Act, and the Dreamers. And so the Socratic seminar really provided that opportunity for students to bring in their knowledge of contemporary issues that is really meaningful, in addition to the historical context that they acquired or learned more about over the course of the unit. And I do finally want to highlight, if you notice that third question, how can we build more awareness about immigration and foster empathy for immigrants facing these challenges? This was another really beautiful part of the unit. I think that we have those really intentional spaces for students to discuss these issues. Kind of builds on what Mr. Bowen was saying earlier, that really this class is about building community and empathy. And it was just really wonderful to see students offering such thoughtful reflections on how to build empathy with one another and with our broader school community and beyond. In terms of some of the student perspectives, we really noticed in the data that students connected with this unit. We'll read just a few perspectives. One student wrote that the immigration unit was important to showing the difficulties that immigrants face and continue to face, and to show the accomplishments and ways that immigrants have helped and continue to help America. So again, that kind of connects to what Dr. Roscoe was talking about a minute ago, and really highlighting those important contributions to various aspects of society. And then another student who wrote that another topic I enjoyed learning about was the immigration unit. I think one reason I found this interesting was because I hadn't really learned about it before. Taking a look at past immigration laws and how they relate to current ones, and how immigrants have and are continuing to shape the country, is interesting to learn about and relevant today. There are a couple more student perspectives we wanted to highlight, so I'll turn it over to my colleague, Mr. Roger Kim, to share some of those.
Hi, I'm Roger Kim. I teach social studies, and I'm part of this wonderful team doing ethnic studies for our first year at Los Altos High School. A lot of my students as well mentioned that the immigration unit was their favorite because it connected to them. And what we really tried to do, as we mentioned before, is to connect this to our own community here in MBLA. And so as a child of immigrants myself, and knowing that many of our students are children of immigrants or even immigrants themselves, we wanted to make sure that this unit connected with them in a really meaningful way. So one student said, the immigration unit spoke to me because my parents are immigrants, and it gave me a deeper understanding of my own parents and really helped me acknowledge the struggles they went through and how those struggles are still there for them today. And then another student mentioned that immigration is so very important to me because my mom is an immigrant from Peru. I love hearing stories about what other people went through because it makes me think about what may have happened to my mom and my family, and how they may have shaped them into who they are today. So again, that connection to their own lives is really important in making the curriculum relevant to them and to their families, and really getting them engaged. And with that, I'll turn it over for Unit 5 to my colleague Anna Perry.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Anna Perry. I also teach social studies at Los Altos High School, and I'm happy to be part of this great team as we start off this year. So Unit 5 was on education and housing, and some of the essential questions that we covered are: what role does education play in shaping identity, culture, and community? And how have historical and contemporary housing policies shaped access to opportunities within diverse communities? Some learning objectives that we looked over were students will investigate the historical and continuing fight for education as a civil right, and the impact education can have on promoting equality or disparity in the diverse population of the United States. And students will analyze the different forms education has taken in the United States, past, present, as well as the impact of these forms of education have had on diverse communities through time. So we've really been focused on diverse perspectives on education and housing, and that historical skill of continuity and change. What has changed over time relative to education and housing, and where have we seen some commonalities carry through? To look at this, we really looked at housing. We kept it local, which is always one of our goals, looking at the history of Palo Alto and East Palo Alto. and how that influences access to educational opportunities. As part of our continuity and change, we look at school desegregation and civil rights, with the Little Rock 9, Mendez versus Westminster, and the East LA blowouts. Rooting our classes always in the knowledge that our students bring, looking at current education, current issues of public education. Our students are the experts there on the receiving end, and looking at school funding, student perspectives, dress codes, which I have a lot of opinions on, school policies. One area that we focus on, we look forward to continuing to develop our issues in bilingual education, and we ended our unit with academic writing and civic engagement relative to these topics. Some examples of some of the assignments that we gave are group tasks to explore the legacy of school desegregation since the Brown v. Ford decision, looking at how efforts have been successful to desegregate schools since that landmark decision. Also giving students some visual history to examine with the Little Rock 9, looking at the really emotional, powerful photos of the Little Rock 9's experience integrating Central High School, and what that can tell us about the process of school desegregation. And then analyzing current dress codes in our district, and focusing how they impact students on the basis of gender, race, and ethnicity, and then giving them the opportunity to apply what they've learned and write their own dress code. How would they design it in a way that aligns with what they've learned and aligns with their own experiences? Some perspectives from students. So go back on there. Education and housing has been the most interesting unit, especially because we're learning a lot about how this area has been affected by segregation and prejudice. Learning about East Palo Alto was also fascinating because of the stigmas we see around it without knowing the full story. Learning about it all was eye-opening. And I like Unit 5 about education and housing because as a class, we talked about how where you live directly impacts your access to education and after-school activities. This is also a very important unit because all children should have access to a good education without having to travel miles and miles to a certain school. So, and these perspectives were taken while we were still in the unit. And so just without even completing the unit, our students are already demonstrating a deep understanding of the purpose of learning about this, the application of ethnic studies to education and housing, and already thinking about ways that they could change our community.
Okay, right on. So my name is Kevin Hyken. I teach ethnic studies at Mountain View High School along with Dr. Jay Gilbride. I'll talk a little bit about Unit 6, which is on the justice system. The justice system, I think for me, for many of us, is a really crucial unit for this course because while, to remind folks, AB 101 did provide this kind of external stimulus for ethnic studies, being mandated by the state. There was a really strong push from the community, the Mount Los Altos community through a petition in the aftermath of the killing of George Floyd for ethnic studies as a really important part of, what this country needs for racial healing. And I think making sure that we include a justice system unit that really honors the complexity of that issue and honors the voices that help really try to prioritize ethnic studies as a course was really important to all of us. And I think this justice system unit has been both a real challenge and a real accomplishment for us as we move forward. Provide a couple of the examples of our conceptual questions here. The origin and purpose of justice in the United States. Looking at kind of the origins of justice, origins of policing, the origins of courts was really crucial for this unit because in addition to kind of the upswell from the community requesting an ethnic studies course after the killing of George Floyd, there was also a really clear need for it, and that a lot of the conversations happening surrounding the U.S. justice system were oftentimes happening in the worst possible spaces. They were happening on social media, they were happening on Twitter, they were happening on Facebook, they weren't curated, there wasn't a lot of good evidence, it was a lot of people kind of just really yelling at each other and kind of yelling past each other. And I think we really felt that it was really needed to make sure that we talk about these things in our classroom, that we explore the evidence in our classroom, that we educate surrounding these important issues to make sure people really understand the complexity of it, and really kind of looking at the origins of the U.S. justice system, where it does come from, a really important part of that. The experiences of diverse communities, the different voices, the different perspectives, the complex experiences about how different communities, different groups of people have been impacted both today and throughout history. And I think we've seen this in the immigration unit, we saw it in education as well. There's a really strong focus on continuity and change over time in this class as we look at both historical examples and present examples, and that really does help our students throughout their social studies careers as, continuity and change is part of the AP frameworks for social studies classes, and just a really useful chronological reasoning skill for them to have. And we have some sample learning objectives as well, kind of looking at the foundations of it, in terms of where our justice system comes from, the very many different pieces of it that are always kind of acting and interacting together in different ways. We kind of see there. As well as the unique traditions of different communities. I think one of the real challenges as well with the justice system unit is making sure that it's a unit that doesn't wallow in negativity. We had a very strong mandate from the community. This class is not supposed to wallow in negativity. This class is supposed to, not only acknowledge, as Mr. Bowen says, some of the real issues that come out of, race in this country, but also kind of celebrate the traditions of different groups of people. We wanted to really make sure that it came across in this unit that a justice system is not something that's unique to Western civilization. It's not something that's unique to Western canon. Cultures across the world have had justice systems for thousands of years. They all look similar and different at times, and hopefully through sharing those diverse experiences, sharing those diverse systems, we can gain a better understanding of what a good justice system can really be that really does function for all people. So some examples up on the screen here, continuity and change over time in our justice system. In terms of what we focus on specifically, we see on kind of the right side there, kind of the three major aspects of the justice system that we look at, the courts, law enforcement, and then corrections as well. And kind of all three of those things are really focused on in a really robust way, both kind of in terms of their historical foundation, as well as contemporary connections. And kind of a little bit of a similar breakdown here, but with a little bit more text to kind of help gain that understanding, talking about the different responsibilities and context, the different origins and traditions that inform justice in the United States, English common law being one of them, but also other cultures that have at times kind of cross-pollinated with our justice system to influence reform. Public safety and law enforcement, and then leaving students there as well, with that civic engagement piece that we really want students to feel, empowered, that, the purpose of the United States is an experiment to increasingly become more perfect, and that, their goal is not to come out of this class feeling bitter or sad, but that, things can get better, things do get better, things have gotten better, and that they are agents to create change themselves. They can always advocate for different policies or different things using the knowledge that they've gained in class. And just kind of one last thing here, an example of one of our justice system activities. One of the big things that came out of, especially the aftermath of the death of George Floyd, was this debate about policing, where policing came from. One of the things that was really passed around on the internet through, tweets and memes and GIFs were the idea of kind of policing originating from slave patrols. It was kind of recited by congressmen as well. And we kind of looked at that question, where does policing really come from? And, students definitely do look at, the role of slave patrol laws as a foundation of early policing, especially in the South. But they also really look at other perspectives too, that it's one of a multitude of complex factors that introduce the origins of policing in the United States, including kind of foundational English common law. They read from an excerpt from President Thomas Jefferson talking about the importance of the sheriff as a foundational value of law enforcement predating slavery or anything, and the importance of having, real kind of passionate, intelligent, compassionate people in positions of authority in law enforcement. To really kind of look at those varying origins. And, this lesson was specifically designed as a way to prepare students as well for SBAC and Common Core. We had conversations with Mr. Bowen here after he had gone to a leadership meeting surrounding kind of, what SBAC was increasingly looking like. And this lesson was designed to provide students with the opportunity to look at a series of different primary sources and ultimately corroborate those various sources for how they might support the claim of a historian in a secondary source, to see like what lines of text best support the historian's claim in the secondary source later on, which is the type of task students frequently have to do on Common Core. So really trying to keep in mind that kind of skill integration as well. So that's it for me on Unit 6.
Terrific. Thank you, Mr. Hyken. So with that, we are going to talk briefly about Unit 7, which focuses on social movements. This is a really exciting unit because it, it bookends the course. It's like the capstone. And really, the students are building on the knowledge they've gained over the course of the entire year in ethnic studies. So as you'll recall, the very first unit that explores the historical origins of what is ethnic studies, how it came to be, and the student activism at San Francisco State University that led to that. And ongoing advocacy, as well as the local push for ethnic studies here in MDLA. So throughout various units, including the education unit later, when students learn about the East LA blowouts, they're also really having those opportunities to examine the complexity of social movements, some of the tensions that occur, and then fundamentally how people take action to influence and transform their communities. So in Unit 7, some of those sample essential questions there. For example, how political and social movements advanced rights and opportunities for communities of color and other diverse groups in the US and their impact. And then also looking at kind of the how, right? Like how and why do people effectively organize? How do they mobilize within their communities through building grassroots organizations or other ways? As you'll note, in that second learning objective there, kind of building on that theme of how people historically in different social movements, as well as today, are engaging and utilizing different strategies, whether that's boycotts or nonviolent, protests or creating locally based community organizations and civil disobedience. So they're really exposed to a broad range of different types of advocacy. And again, as we do throughout the whole course, they're able to identify and analyze and evaluate the impact of those strategies, again, going back to Unit 1 and then carrying it through the rest of the course. So as an example, we're, starting Unit 7 now. So and again, it's kind of that capstone and just these last couple of weeks of the year. Students have the choices about different social movements. Once again, it gives a rich opportunity to look at local history. So this inquiry on why did American Indians, so drawing on the AIM movement, American Indian movement, or Native American communities, individuals occupy Alcatraz Island in the late 1960s, and how has this event influenced Native American people locally and across the US. And it's really exciting. I can also say from my experience in teaching a social justice class that students tend to really engage in these topics, whether they're exploring the experience of Native Americans in Alcatraz, or they're looking, for example, at social movements focused on advancing rights for Asian Americans, or many other movements. It's really that empowerment piece that we think is so important that we've been developing through the class. And we're excited and looking forward to seeing the final presentations that the students come up with as they're creating, galleries and Google Slides and teaching one another about these important social justice movements. So that's coming up as we're closing the class out. And that's the preview of Unit 7. And with that, I'll turn it over to Roger, I believe. Is Roger to share the final reflections?
I think that's.
Oh, I'm
Yeah,
sorry, Catherine. I was trying to remember the transition there. Thank you, Catherine.
Sorry, I just came in at the last minute. I realized I could make it to this meeting, so we're kind of like getting it together. But, ooh, yes, 7 units. The reason I say ooh, because it required a lot of work, a lot of hard work. And I don't feel that these slides really kind of show the experience on a day-to-day, how it's like to be with these kids and having these conversations, and really some of the kids getting angry about some of the things that they're reading about, and I'm getting like hopeful, or I'm realizing like, wow, I didn't know that. I just found that out. So I think that that's why I'm like, ooh, that was the whole presentation. And so at least for my part, I know that my students really enjoyed the course because it wasn't only history. It was various topics and how these topics impacted their community. Like we already talked about how we talked about Peace, Palo Alto, and areas that surround this area. So basically also looking at the importance, one topic that we discussed with, or I discussed with my students, is that sometimes as a society with cell phones, we become desensitized about certain topics like injustice, and we see those things on the screen, and sometimes we have become desensitized, but I feel that this course, from what I've seen from my colleagues and the students that my colleagues teach, they understand the importance of these topics and how they relate to their everyday lives, like education, housing. And so, like Kevin was talking about, not wallowing in the negative of each of these topics, looking at how our community could change and how we could look at these topics as a form of empowerment, making sure that all of us do our part to change our communities, because now that we know the history and what the situation is right now, we could all play a part in improving these like topics like housing, education, etc. So. Let me go ahead and read the final reflection. So this is from a student, and it says, I highly enjoy ethnic studies because it is a history-based class unlike any that I've ever taken. Not only did I learn about things that I've never learned in the past, I've also gotten to learn about recent and outgoing events. In addition to this, I've enjoyed this class because it can be very empowering and impactful. So this is some survey data from all of the courses. And as you see, the question is, do you feel empowered or inspired to learn more about some of the topics discussed in ethnic studies? And as you see, the combination of 4 and 5, which 5 me being a yes, definitely. We see that combined, it's 92%. And these are from both sections, the LAHS and MBHS. So I will pass it over to. Oh, Annie.
All right, so as Catherine was talking about, our students have voiced for us both in the previous meetings and in our classrooms and in the survey, just about what they feel like they've learned from this course. And again, we're not even all the way through yet, and this is already what they feel that they can take away. But this student said that ethnic studies has strengthened our critical and free thinking. It taught us how to look closely at history and present day laws, policies, and social norms. It showed us, historically how minorities have been oppressed and how they fought back. This class has empowered many students, and everyone I've talked to in ethnic studies has loved it. And I think this really captures what we're hoping our students will take away, that they are learning about the history and about the current events, and sometimes that's not the easy history to learn about or the easy current events, but they still walk away feeling empowered and like their voice matters. And if they're learning that in 9th grade, I can't wait to see what they accomplish in the next several years. And just to build on that with more numbers data, the vast majority of our students also feel like this class has helped them build greater empathy. And as we continue to see, different interactions happen at the high school level, we can only hope that if our students continue to build empathy with one another, that will only result in positive outcomes for our school.
And just a couple more kind of final student reflections. These two really stood out to me just because they're kind of emblematic of what I think is a really important theme to hammer home. And that is, for our students, this really has not been a controversial class. Like, the students have enjoyed it. The students have come in, they've been exposed to a multitude of different perspectives. Students have disagreed with each other on those perspectives. We are dealing with issues like immigration and policing, and we're showing multiple points of view, multiple justifications. Justifications for why the systems exist as they are, justifications for why people feel they're unfair and they should change. And, the students are discussing these things. It's not a linear, unilateral point of view class. It's a multitude of perspectives, not just 2 perspectives, oftentimes 5, 6, 7 different perspectives, and the students are really engaging, consuming these perspectives, and coming out of it with a really positive attitude. And I think that last one there, bold, my understanding of the world and how I see things has changed, and I'm happy about that. And that comes from the materials that are provided to students, but it's also really coming from the conversations the students are having with each other through the Socratic discussions, through the group work tasks, through the class conversations that we're having, learning from each other, building that empathy, and really getting a more complex understanding of their reality and a more complex understanding of the whole human experience, which is really what this is all about.
So I'll be passing it back over to our assistant superintendent in a moment. I just want to say, as we're wrapping up and we look forward to, continuing the conversation, that I just feel so fortunate to work alongside such incredibly dedicated, creative teachers who have poured hundreds, if not thousands of hours into developing this class. It's just an amazing team to work with and collaborate. I've been learning, every day by working with them. And we also feel so appreciative of the leadership of our department coordinators, both Nate Bowen as well as Chelsea Doiguchi, and our principals, and of course our district leadership. So we just really want to thank everybody. This has been a real journey this year, and it's been a really exciting and transformative one in many ways.
Great, thank you. Well, I too wanted to give a shout out of appreciation. This team and a few others worked over the summer, above and beyond what any of our other teachers worked. I would say double the hours. They're checking in with each other in the evening, over the weekend. This is the second presentation this year by this group, and I know that they've worked a lot off hours to prepare for this, in addition to the 4 presentations last year. And so just a lot of appreciation, but also that you are a model of what collaboration looks like. And not only a model of what collaboration looks like, but they designed last year the framework and the lessons and the curriculum that we've seen and was presented today and in May aligns with this framework, from the objective to the essential questions. They've done a very diligent job of making sure that their curriculum reaches those overarching goals, that all of our subject areas has one form or another type of framework. And they did a great job of developing that curriculum. In addition to that, I want to just again give an acknowledgement of when I say developing the curriculum. We have 2 teachers on this panel in this group that have doctorate degrees with emphasis in ethnic studies. We have a teacher on this panel that taught ethnic studies in the past. We have a teacher on this panel that is highly credible for student-centered classrooms. And we have a teacher on this panel who teaches at Stanford on pedagogical approaches into the social studies curriculum. And so we have highly qualified teachers that have developed this curriculum very intentionally and thoughtfully this year. Moving into next year, we're going to have a little bit of an increase of this group. And what we're going to probably expect to see with the curriculum that we've reviewed over the last 2 study sessions is some adjustments in the pacing, some differentiation and scaffolding added. And I would say that this is not new to any other course that exists. We still have courses like biology, to world history, to civics, to Spanish, that every year they're refining their curriculum and their courses. In addition, we'll be seeing the ongoing collaboration at the course team level and at the district level to, again, continue to work on and refine or adjust any of their curriculum. And in terms of next year, we're going to grow from 7 ethnic studies sections this year to at Mountain View, 5 at Los Altos, to close to 50 sections next year, roughly around 21 at Mountain View and 25 at Los Altos. So I think it was a great idea that we supported small scale implementation this year to really pave a nice runway from going from 5 teachers to 12 to 14 teachers next year. So we're doubling or quadrupling everything. And these new teachers and this abundance of sections is walking into a strong, solid footing that they feel very comfortable and confident in doing so. We also very proudly support co-teaching at this district, and in addition to our ethnic studies classes, we will have section of co-teaching, and that means that a student that may have struggled in a general education classroom, so would have been in a specialized special education classroom, we pair in the classroom a special ed teacher with a gen ed teacher to be able to provide a more inclusive and supportive access for our special education students. And I'd say if you've ever gone into a co-taught class, you have no clue who the special education teacher is, or the gen ed teacher, or the gen ed students, or the special ed students. It is a dynamic classroom environment that definitely exudes that inclusivity that we strive for at MDLA. In addition, moving forward, we're going to continue to support professional learning. We have 2 full days tomorrow with roughly about 18 teachers, so that's subs in their classes. Where I will have 2 days of doing deep dive into the curriculum from this year, as well as working with the county office on some professional learning support into the summertime, like I said, with Curriculum Institute hours, and then ongoing into the academic year with either after school or during the day release times. Last year, as we developed our curriculum, we did a lot of community engagement. We met with several parent and student communities to get feedback as we developed the curriculum. This year, we met with our Jewish Community Relations Council from the Mountain View area, got feedback and had great supportive conversations from them. Moving into next year, we plan to continue these community engagement conversations, as well as gathering the data, both qualitative, like we saw today from the student feedback, which I think I want to copy paste some of that on our webpage. It's very moving to hear the students have such a experience in the classroom, as well as the quantitative data. Are we seeing that engagement increase? Are we seeing academic attendance increase that we've heard about from our ethnic studies classes? And I feel confident with that. And then again, just ongoing, of course, refining. And so thank you again to this panel, as well as to our trustees for your time today. And at this point, we will turn this over to you. And I'll just note, I'll be taking notes from the questions and the comments that are discussed today.
Thank you all very much. I agree, your expertise was on full display today, your command of the subject. We really appreciate all the effort you have put into this. So having said that, let me give the public an opportunity to comment, and I have one request so far from Ella Omura.
Perhaps you could use
If you could use the microphone here, that will certainly help me. Thank you.
I don't understand. Hello, board members, ethnic studies teachers, all of the people that have supported me throughout this last year. And as I say last year, I remember all of the fun times in ethnic studies. I'm about to finish my freshman year in high school, which is the first of many years. I wrote another poem just to summarize everything I've learned this year. And here is change through my eyes. As I look back on Miss Perry's ethnic studies class, I finally know why it's important to learn about others' perspectives. The power of perspective taking is a choice, not a choice between light and dark or strength and weakness. Rather, consider the light cast on a dark part of history and the strength it takes to address weakness. Over the past year, I've been a learner. I have discovered my identity, dismantled the 4 eyes of oppression, embraced my origin story, examined the wide gaps in education and housing, realized the unjust 21st century neo-slavery, and led the charge to be the change in my community. But what I've learned most is what it means to be a student in the 21st century, to understand the history before you and decide to be better. You see, ethnic studies was never about excluding any race or person from the discussion. If anything, it brings more chairs to the table. When everybody holds a piece of the puzzle, the full picture can only be complete when everybody contributes. Everybody brings their experience, unlike
any other. When we share our stories, we are exercising our strength of vulnerability. Historically, we have seen so much pain and anguish. While many are numbed to this pain, students of ethnic studies have said, enough is enough, and have become tuned in to ourselves and others' needs. This is the class creating positive change throughout our community. One way or another, everyone is hurt. So why are we fighting over who has it worse or who has it better? We have all felt alone. The pandemic only worsened these feelings. And yet there's solidarity in feeling solitary. There's someone or something that understands you. Because when the walls fall down, we can finally see ourselves in others. Thank you.
Are there any others who wish to speak on the subject? Okay. Board members, any comments?
I would like her to, I know it'll be in the transcript, the oral transcript, but could you send us a digital copy of that lovely poem?
Any other comments?
I do, but I'll let others.
I have tons of comments about the actual course. I was just.
Yes, that's understood. Okay, well, it looks like we're going to finish early. I am still going to look at the comments that have been submitted, and I think the rest of the board members will look at those all. And I think we all have a much better understanding of what you're doing as a result of the last two presentations. We haven't had the opportunity yet to go into the actual units and the lesson, but that is something each board member can now do on his or her own, and funnel questions and comments through Nellie or directly to you. So that's probably something that'll be happening over the next couple of weeks. Again, all I can say is you have undertaken a tremendous task. I appreciate what you said, Nene, earlier, that this is a big job. And I think you handled it very well. If there are some minor tweaks, I hope you won't be offended. It is of the nature of progress that tweaks occur. You've already mentioned that next year you're going to be teaching the course to a different audience. This year they were either self-selected or recruited. This year, next year, they will be forced to be there. My own personality is such that whenever I'm forced to do anything, I hate it. So if you force me to eat ice cream, my favorite task, I would be torn. But eventually I eat the ice cream. So I think that's what's happening. And I think many, many more students who are perhaps disinclined or their parents are disinclined to have them in this course will come to see that it's of great benefit. So that's something we can all look forward to, thanks to your hard work.
So actually, I do have some questions.
Oh, you do? I'm sorry.
I did too. I did too.
Oh, okay.
You
guys
go
wanna
first.
No, go ahead.
I want you to go first.
Esme, why don't you go ahead?
I can go first. So I just wanted to thank you all for a wonderful presentation and for I just based off the testimonials from the students, I think you've provided such a quality opportunity for students to see themselves in the curriculum, maybe for some students for the first time. And they're so lucky that they get to experience this before they even get to college, because I know so many students don't get that opportunity. So I just want to thank you for that. I do have two questions. The first, just based off student response, I'm curious which unit you have found the most impactful and why?
I'll speak for my own classes. The education unit, I feel that it was very close to like the environment that they're in every day, almost every day. So we had really good discussions on like dress codes and disciplinary action. So I definitely feel that really stuck out to them.
I would say, for me, it's a tie between the immigration unit and unit 2, which is our identity unit. Immigration, because we learn about a lot of history that they don't cover in other classes, even in US history. Like I have a Mexican American student that was kept saying, oh, I never knew about this program about repatriating Mexican Americans. Even if they were citizens, they were sent back to Mexico during the Great Depression. And so he loved learning about that. But despite that, we're still here. We're all still here and overcoming these things. And then the identity unit, I think, is really impactful for students because it gives them the vocabulary to help them explore their own. And we say that could change. You know, it's something that's constantly evolving. Even for me, I talk about my experiences. You know, I'm in my 40s and had gone through many iterations of what I felt my identity was. So it gives them the space to explore that for themselves. And for a lot of them, it's just beginning. A lot of them thought about it for a long time. So.
I think for my students, it's been, I just need to keep adding on here, but identity, justice system, education, and housing. Like Roger said, for identity, they just had a lot of students who were grateful to learn vocabulary to describe things that they felt or knew, but then also build on that and be able to share with one another, and find those grounds of commonality, even with people that they didn't, you know, it's ninth grade, maybe didn't assume that they had commonality with when they walked in on day one. And then education and housing and the justice system, they're experiencing our education system and our housing systems, and they see our justice systems on TV, and just being able to shape our lessons around where their questions are and answer that, and help unpack why things are, or at least give them the tools to be able to explore those whys. It's been really, I'm grateful to be their teacher and get to watch them ask questions and then answer their questions through their research, through their learning, through their critical thinking, independently with each other.
I guess I can just briefly chime in for Unit 3, the origins of systems of power. And I think the reason that a lot of my students thought it was really engaging was because we actually spent a substantial amount of time talking about like pre-colonial Africa, pre-colonial Mesoamerica, you know, pre-colonial North America. It's a lot of content students normally don't get in high school unless they take AP World History, which is just kind of unfortunate because I think a lot of that content, right, is really important, it's really relevant, and it shouldn't be kind of, you know, only put in an AP track course. So for kids to really get that information and to understand kind of some of the power and splendor and the achievements of a lot of these civilizations, you know, I think they found really interesting. I think it's just a really important part of the class and a really big goal, you know, for this class.
And I would say Unit 4 about immigration and also Unit 2 on identity and narratives. What I would just share briefly about the immigration unit is that I think part of what was so engaging is that students did really share these like rich experiences, you know, and I had students go home and talk with their parents and their grandparents and come in with, you know, like more knowledge about their own family roots. And then you could see in the Socratic seminar that students are bringing in, you know, all the historical evidence, but they're also speaking from the heart in a way that I think was really meaningful. And then with the identity and narratives unit, you know, just for students to learn more about like the diversity within and across groups, I think was really, really cool. And then sort of the application of knowledge. One of the topics we discussed before is like students learning more about diverse Jewish identities and you know, many different identities. And when we provided those spaces for students to learn about, you know, incidents of anti-Semitism today, in their elementary schools are right here, and then, you know, having them talk about ways that people are really taking action to raise awareness was just really cool, and I think speaks to that empowerment piece that is so important in the class.
Thank you all for sharing. I do have one more question.
What are some of the challenges that you anticipate next year as we think about a bigger course team and all freshmen?
Well, I think there are a number of, we really need to frame our goals and our vision around that, like this next phase, you know, as we go into full scale implementation. I think one of the ongoing challenges and opportunities is like creating collaborative structures and like ongoing learning opportunities for our teachers. Because we'll have, you know, large course teams at each site, and some people bring in a lot of ethnic studies background or experience, and then for some people, it's very new and they don't have a lot of experience. And so just making sure that we have those spaces that are really intentional for us to support our colleagues and us as well to like continue to engage in professional learning, so that, you know, collectively we're building, you know, the most successful class that we can for students.
Okay, I have several comments, so can I say them all and then you can respond to them? One is not so much on these units, frankly, although I have a couple questions on these, but the identity and the power ones drew quite a bit of comment at the last meeting. So I hope you're keeping a running list or whatever of the kind of hot buttons people come up with. And as you, my dad's favorite phrase was iterative refinement. As you iteratively refine the way you present these things to address those kind of concerns or worries from the community, I think that would be great. And I don't know what else will come up next year when you have lots more students involved in that. Let's see what else. I wrote them down as we went. I'm glad that you beefed up the contributions part in that one unit of contributions of all the different people. And what I got a lot of times, and also from Ella, is that the whole course, different parts of it, lead students to an awareness of they get it. Before they didn't even know it existed, and now not only do they know the situation in immigration or in identity or anything exists, but they also get it. They get it in terms of the world, and they get it in terms of themselves. And I think that it's just so incredible value, and I thank you for doing that. What about prejudice? Where does that fit in? You know, not just like anti-Semitism is obviously a prejudice, but does that come up over and over again? Prejudice on this or prejudice in that, you know, where people are excluding people just because they're prejudiced, and where did it come from? I mean, where does that kind of fit in? Don't tell me right this minute. And then in the justice one, do you ever discuss like rule of law and what that means in terms of the justice system? Because, you know, you hear on the news, oh, that country doesn't follow rule of law, or there's that. I was just wondering how that fit in or not. And then I see that having gone to some civics classes, you know, to review and stuff, that in your unit 6, the historical context and also the diverse historical origins are covered in the civics class as a senior too. So are you going to work with those teams to like not necessarily repeat but enhance or whatever you said you articulated with all the different other classes? And then I also noticed you were talking about doing presentations and stuff, and they did PowerPoints and this and that. I really think it's so valuable for you to get freshmen into the more sophisticated presentation situation. And not all schools have people doing stuff like that as a freshman. And I think that's really valuable too, not just for your content, but in general to give them the thing. And then when you say you're going to adjust, what did you call it? Your pacing? Your pacing, does that mean like how many weeks you're going to spend on each unit and stuff like that? Just, and because that was one of my questions was going to be, what is the layout of how many weeks are spent on each one? But I guess that may be fluid over time, that iterative refinement. Let's see what else. I'm really pleased that you kind of fit into AP kind of concepts and also SBAC and stuff like that, because that's really neat too. How do you, what is the teacher training, or how do you, just because you're teachers anyway, handle the disagreements or the ones where you have a very divided thing? Because our nation is, well, the whole world is pretty tense with each other. And so when you do have a really diametrically opposed point of view on a certain topic, how do the teachers handle that sort of thing without being critical of one side versus the other and stuff like that? I don't know that you can tell me that right now if I need to come to class and see how it pans out in one of your questions, because I would go, what do I do? They're all arguing about this sort of thing. So I'm just curious on that. And I think that's about it. Let me see. I just think it's really great that you have been, when the word vulnerable came up, you have all been vulnerable. You've taken on the vulnerability of designing a whole class from scratch, which is not what we usually do. And I hope it's turned out okay for you, and we're behind you. And then the students have embraced an vulnerability also to express their own identity and then put it out there how they feel about all these different topics. And I'm wondering if some of them are going to become legislators or senators, the kids, and like write immigration law or anything like that. So I could just see it. You could have that as an assignment. Please write the bill for changing immigration laws. Anyway, I just think it's so great that everybody is embracing this. So I love it.
Kevin, do you want the team to respond to some?
I want them to
questions?
respond to anything about it that I said.
So I
Not just the praise part, but anything that turned into kind of a question.
So thank you so much for the support. I was writing some notes and I'm sure that my colleagues will answer other parts of your questions, but for the disagreements, definitely from the beginning of the school year, we created a supportive and respectful environment, and that was one of the main things because we knew that there would be some disagreements. And like Kevin said, sometimes it's not like yes or no; it's like 7 different positions. And so definitely, I told my colleagues several times about my mini class, my 14 student class, but they're the loudest I've ever taught. So definitely they have some disagreements, they have different positions, but we know that it comes from a place of love, and that we're having these discussions in order to learn and to grow. And so we know that we have to state our positions in a respectful manner, and I hope that our society definitely learns from these students that you could disagree with each other, and it's we always embrace that. We don't want to think alike because we are so diverse, and we want to learn from each other. And to the point of the hot button issue, that's the thing with history. Sometimes it will be uncomfortable, and we have to create the space to have these discussions instead of kind of shying away. And changing the terms of certain units, changing the terminology, vocabulary. Sometimes we have to be uncomfortable in order to face these issues, and sometimes I think that that's what our society doesn't want to talk about it. And if we avoid it, we won't progress as a nation or as a society. So that's the way I view ethnic studies. Sometimes we will be uncomfortable. Sometimes there'll be a hot topic issue or hot button issue. But it's good to be uncomfortable because that's the study of social studies, and we confront them face on and have these discussions and try to come up with a consensus if we can, or agree to disagree.
I can answer the question of the civics class. When these topics are brought up again in later classes, that's definitely intended. We cover some of the stuff already in US history. We talk about in the Chinese Exclusion Act. We talk about the justice system when we get to civics. But the idea here is that with this foundational course, we'll have more buy-in from these students, and they will know their place within some of this history and some of these processes a little better. When I look at these slides, when I look at the survey data, that was presented at the end of the presentation, 63% more excited about learning more about the topics discussed, 67% feeling like they have greater empathy. I mean, as a social studies department coordinator, this is like, I love seeing this because even though this is a relatively small sample size across 5 teachers with 7 sections, it's not insignificant. I mean, this is really, really good data. And that tells me that these students are going to, when they get to those topics in later classes, they're going to feel buy-in. We heard relevance brought up a lot from the different teachers talking about the different meanings. They're going to have a sense of relevance. They're going to have a sense of why this matters. I mean, one of the things with teaching social studies that you get sometimes from students is, why am I taking this class? Why do I have to do this? And sometimes it's hard to explain that to them when you get them as a junior or a senior. But hopefully with ethnic studies, that we won't hear that question as much. They will understand why it's important. And when you get to those topics, they'll have more of an opinion and an informed opinion about it. And we'll be able to sink our teeth into some of these areas of our history to quote our student over here, need light shine on. So that's what we're thinking when we're going to be revisiting these topics in later lessons. I really see this class as foundational and so important, not a one and done thing. It's got to be built on the subsequent classes they take sophomore, junior, and senior year for it to be truly meaningful and impactful.
To build off of this Nate and Catherine on both of those things, I think in terms of what Nate's talking about with the civics curriculum, I think, that we definitely are mindful of that, and that there's a fine line between building schema and prior knowledge that is really useful for students in future classes and then outright redundancy. And we definitely want to do that first option there. And we are mindful that when we do a pronounced case study on something in ethnic studies, that it's not something that there's a pronounced case study on in US history or civics. So like, while a concept might be mentioned, whether it's talked about for 10 minutes in civics, we might talk about it for 90 minutes. It's never going to be a redundancy piece. And I think there's a lot of education research on trying to build schema, and how schema is really, really powerful for students to feel safe when they go from grade level to grade level, to have a little bit of that kind of prior knowledge they can sink their teeth into. Okay, I know, I'm confident in this area, I belong here. And with the hot button issue piece, while we definitely do value our students' personal experiences and everything, we want them to connect on a personal level. We also really strongly value evidence, and the discussions that they're having are evidence-based, and the resources that they're being given, they're scholarly texts. They come from a lot of different perspectives, but we're not giving people documents from random bloggers or right-wing or left-wing firebrands. We're giving them resources that have value that would be discussed at a university level. And to give like an example, I recently did an activity in my ethnic studies classroom on the increased usage of kind of military style equipment and kind of more military style training by police officers, and the impact that that's had on the justice system and policing. And one of the sources students read from is from a police officer who was involved in stopping a mass shooting, explaining why that training and why that equipment was super valuable for that person. So it's not just these people are bad, these people are good. It's there's a perspective here, there's evidence here. You're not just disagreeing with a person or with a personal belief. You need to have evidence to cite your views, and we make sure that the evidence that we give is really strictly curated, because we're not just we take our job super seriously. We don't just want to throw some random article at a kid when we don't know who the person is. So that kind of evidence-based nature of the discussion, really trying to build that really strong dialectic argumentation, and that really is an important piece of university learning. Something that we really try to prioritize in our activities, and ethnic studies just gives us a really relevant lens to do that.
I'm glad to hear you say that, and I hope that the few audience we have here, but the people listen to the bit of the audio or the streaming of this will hear that, because that was sort of a rhetorical question, just to have everybody's minds at ease that this is being handled with things like you said, and evidence and so on.
And if I could just build briefly, I wanted to loop back to one of the first questions that you posed on the role of prejudice, how that's taught in the course. And what I would mention is certainly there are meaningful opportunities throughout the course for students to examine examples of that historically, as well as today, and certainly to be able to share their experiences if they're comfortable facing that or their family. A similar focus, though, is placed on the role of allyship and the role of like resilience. So an example in the class might be historical, like a case study on the history of San Jose Chinatown and the arson and the role of the city of San Jose in, creating conditions that allowed for that. And so certainly, I mean, the prejudice and the racism, the xenophobia is very present. They also learned about the example of Highland and the creation of Highlandville and a German immigrant who stepped up to support the Chinese Americans. And then similarly, just to kind of pull through a contemporary connection, when students were learning about the experiences of some Asian American and Pacific Islander people during this pandemic and the increase in hate crimes, they also learned about ways that people of all different racial, cultural backgrounds and ages, have stood up to be allies as well. So it's that ongoing theme of kind of holding what's challenging about history, not shying away from that, but also uplifting forms of resilience and empowerment.
And in fact, prejudice is actually one of the words that we define in Unit 2. And so we give them that vocabulary that we will use constantly throughout the entire year, and looking at racism as a type of prejudice. And so it's a word that we use often and try to give examples of, and like Julie was saying, how we overcome that, giving them the tools to overcome that and look at it within themselves. As historians, we know that everybody has some kind of bias. Everything has some kind of bias. We just have to be able to pick it out and move past that. And to answer Ms. Ortiz's question about the challenges for next year, I think when everybody is forced to eat the ice cream, so to speak, we may have some more pushback, as we've already seen. One of the biggest challenges, and to address your question as well, about one of the biggest challenges I felt throughout the year, one of the most exhausting things, it is first and foremost very rewarding to see our students grow so much this year, but one of the most exhausting things I found is to be hyper vigilant when students do disagree and what kind of disagreements they have, because we build a community from day one to hopefully give them the tools to speak to each other in a respectful manner. But sometimes it has crossed into ways where they have been inappropriate and used words that are very explicit that are not to be used in class, and we have to be hyper vigilant about addressing it right then and there. And we have and come up with solutions with students involved. So in my experience, it has been very tough dealing with some of those things throughout the year, but the support from administration and everybody in this room has been wonderful and helps us get through that. So I have no doubt that next year, as more students come in that may be opposed to what we might be teaching and don't want to eat ice cream, they will eventually find out that it is for everyone, and will help everybody to have more empathy.
Could I just follow up on what you said there? I think that's very admirable, especially the part about using hurtful language. So one thing that I find so bad about that is that you are attempting to get people to discuss ideas, different perspectives, ways of looking at things, sure. And then suddenly it degenerates into you are bad because you are this. And that is very much an ad hominem kind of attack, getting away from the idea. And I like the approach you have of, first of all, acknowledging that this has happened, and then dealing with it directly, and bringing it back to how do we talk about the idea instead of getting angry with somebody for having that idea. So if you can pull that off, your course should be taught to the entire country, no matter what it is.
Can I just say something about that? So like other trustees, I was concerned about the challenge of it being mandatory. So last time, as I said to you, I challenged you with the mindset of when I was a freshman, confused about my identities, which are Anglo-Burmese immigrant with disabilities, which is a mouthful to say. And I didn't know how they all fit together. And I certainly would not have wanted to take ethnic studies because I was constantly having to prove I belong. So other students will have their own reasons for not wanting to be there. But you answer my questions with patience, compassion, empathy, and academic analysis, and also evidence. And you showed me that you will live up to the value of including every student, which was my main concern, because as a trustee, we have to serve all students. So that is why I challenged you, because I know that's what's going to happen in your class. There are going to be students who are terrified to be there because there are parents who are scared too, that their worldview is going to like come crashing down around them. And I think what you've showed me is it's actually an affirmation and basically a coming together, because in the end, I do believe in the inherent worth and dignity of all humans, which you do as well. And I think you've shown that continuously with your answer to your questions.
May I add to that too, that it's so good that it's a freshman class, because I was going, oh, middle college students and Alta Vista and all the students should be exposed to it. Well, they will have been, unless they enter as a newcomer later on, because they get this at their comprehensive high school before they go to those programs. I wonder if in some cases they won't end up in another school because they love it so much at their own campus after they have more of a collegial feeling with their fellow students after a class like this.
That's the goal.
So, yeah, I can climb in. The enormity of the scope, creating an ethnic studies curriculum definitely wasn't lost on me. I don't think it's lost on anybody here on the school board. So I appreciate you putting this together. I think you put together a fantastic curriculum. And I think we've spoken this before. I remember, over a year ago when we had our first meetings on this, I think one of the outcomes we wanted was an appreciation of the diverse cultures that are around us, that we interact with every day of our lives here in Silicon Valley. And I was taken by the young lady's poem today that it's not just that, but it also how it personalizes the experience of the individual as well. And I think to have that effect, not only on her, and I'm sure on many others in your classes, said a lot about the curriculum. It's also said a lot about each of you as well. So appreciate that very much. I think that's incredible to be able to do that, to affect students that way. So some questions I do have. So I'm just going to go through unit by unit. So on unit 4, immigration and migration, I'd like to understand a little bit about specifically what are the groups that are covered in that unit, and and how did you prioritize? Because there's so many. I would think there would have to be some type of priority that some people deserve a little bit more attention than some of the others in certain terms regarding the history of the U.S. So I'm just curious about that.
I can speak to that briefly and feel free to chime in. One of the areas that we've chosen to focus on is, of course, immigration, but throughout all of our units, a focus on the Bay Area, as we've mentioned, because we do think it's so important to understand our local context. And then also back to Catherine's earlier question about how we're being mindful of the 4-year social studies sequence. So certain topics related to immigration that students will study in their junior year, we're going to be taking and looking more of that local focus. So an example we've highlighted a few times is with the Chinese Exclusion Act, but really looking at the local impact of that. We're also really mindful of selecting particular groups based on like the laws that have had the biggest impact on those groups and in our local communities. So certainly the experience of Mexican migration to this area, diverse Asian migration, whether that's from China, from Japan, from other areas. So kind of a combination of looking at the diversity within our local community, coupled with these waves of migration over time to this area. And then again, like these impactful kind of transition points. So if we look at, for example, the impact of the 1965 Civil Rights Act, it's like how that opened up doors and how more workers, for example, came to Silicon Valley for jobs in science and technology. So kind of a combination, I would say, of those factors.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that? Is that
Okay, okay. Go ahead.
So I was wondering if you have like a world map or anything like that, because people come from everywhere, but like, there aren't that many Burmese that come, if I was taking your class, people have said my country doesn't exist. I mean, not before we were in the news. So do you have like a world map that just kind of shows the full diaspora? So just sort of showing, because people come from everywhere from the Bay Area, actually, even if it's like, I think we're 0.1% or something like that.
Yeah, to jump in here, we definitely do. They definitely have seen and they've compared, maps of which groups of people are coming to the United States at what point in time. And the guys, kind of Dr. Yick was talking about, certain immigration laws over time have loosened or kind of made more strict immigration in the country. So, they definitely have seen, how especially people have come from, especially more countries post 1965, and they have looked at maps. When we do certain immigration activities, or really activities in general, one of the nice things about kind of the BYOD, bring your own device policy at MBLA is that you're able to really easily hyperlink images onto Google Docs that students can look at. So if there's like a document card on refugees coming from Vietnam, students can click on a little link and it takes them immediately to a map of Vietnam, so they can kind of have that visual contextualization of where this group of people is coming from. So there most certainly were a lot of maps that were analyzed in the immigration unit. And to kind of build off of Mr. Dave's question as well, in terms of selecting groups, generally I think when teachers organize history classes, there's this kind of two approach idea of, you can either do breadth or depth. And I think that whether you do one or the other is kind of a false choice. I think we've always felt that really both is the best way to go. And some activities are more depth activities, some activities are more breadth activities. And, oftentimes when you're looking at depth, it's a group of people that maybe, had a very large immigration population at a certain point in time. I think, Dr. Yick brought up Chinese immigrants. San Jose had one of the largest Chinatowns in the entire country. It was burned to the ground in a very poorly remembered event. And, we do a very big depth case study on, the burning of that Chinatown and what that really said about kind of American immigrant attitudes at that time. And then, Dr. Orozco earlier talked about contributions of immigrants, especially to the Bay Area. And, that was a really big breadth activity. We weren't necessarily focusing on one group, let's look at multiple different resources on this. It was like, let's see, what people from South Asia have done. Let's see what people from Mexico have done. Let's see what people from, Japan, from El Salvador, from all these different places, kind of little pieces here and there, just for students to kind of sink their teeth into little bits of breadth to really appreciate the overwhelming diversity of the area. So I think with probably immigration more than any other unit, we toggled between those two approaches very consistently, where we looked at a depth group and then a breadth group as well to really feature as many folks as possible.
Do you discuss the change in F1 and H1 laws in the last 40 years that has basically completely changed, especially Silicon Valley, but the United States in general? Do you talk about the because that's a huge F1 and H1, the laws that have changed in 40 years, from 40 years ago, pre-40 years ago, I should say, and in the last 40 years, has kind of completely, I'd say, evolved this, community completely from what it was. So is that something that's covered?
I think we've looked at kind of broader trends in terms of immigration related to science and technology. That's certainly an area we'd be interested in exploring in more depth. It's one of those questions of as we continue to refine the course moving forward, there may be topics that we didn't have an opportunity to include this year that we might build out more next year. And so that might be one of those topics.
I mean, if you want to talk about locally, right, Silicon Valley, I mean, there isn't anything more about immigration. I mean, I should say, of course, there's a lot more in terms of history, the Mexicans and the Chinese from the history, but in terms of recent, the immigration with F1 and H1, right? Science, technology, true, a lot came through with engineering or science, but it comes through other means as well. But the F1 and H1 laws that basically allow more and more to immigrate to the United States, it's had a huge impact.
And it is included, to answer your, it is basically what you said is what's included. It appears in the more of the breadth activity on the contribution of immigrants. So it's not like a depth case study, but there is like a sentence, the context note. There's an article that's provided that talks about the impact of it. And it's one of probably a half dozen or so resources students look at in that activity that are on different groups of people, but it's not one of the things.
And I just want to make clear, I'm not in no way equating it to the struggle of migration and other immigrant communities that have come through, other means through a struggle. So this, I'm not equating that at all, but I know that it is for immigration, it's especially in this community, it's been a huge, change. So the other one on education and housing, I just, you mentioned dress code, and I'm just curious. So you mentioned so specifically about the dress code of our district and the discussions you have. So if you can just tell me a little bit about that specific lesson and what it is that you're teaching and what is that what is, I guess, the discussions with students on that.
So we started it more broadly looking at the government accountability office was directed to do a study on all United States public schools dress codes by the spending bill last year in Congress. We took data from that, which broke down dress codes around the country, looking at impacts based on gender, based on race and ethnicity, to see how different student populations were targeted around the country. So we first get a broad United States perspective with government sourced data, like Kevin was saying, this is like a very college level resource. From there, using that kind of background knowledge that the students had built, we asked them to look at the dress codes for Mountain View, Los Altos, and Alta Vista, and to kind of look at some of the kind of comparison and contrast based on what they saw. So in a lot of ways, they identified like, our dress code is a lot more inclusive, and they were excited to see that. And then they also kind of brainstormed some ways as well, that they felt like it could be further refined. But it was really about looking at how do we see some using dress codes as an example for how while we do live in a society where we are, post Brown versus board, and we have schools where we all get to learn from one another, how we still see some of these topics coming up. It wasn't that Brown solved all issues. And so using some government data to help them kind of understand that nationwide, and then narrow it down to specifically our district and just do a further analysis.
I'd love to jump in.
Yes, please.
About 2.5 years ago, our district took a look at our dress code. It was actually brought forth by some of our student government courses, but also with the push from the state. We reached out to several districts throughout California and even some of our neighboring states who are a little further along with us, and we learned from their process and we examined their dress codes, and it was a collaborative conversation. So I'm glad to hear that they felt it was inclusive, because that was definitely our approach, was who are we unfairly targeting with this, and how do we make these refinements so that it's still a safe place to learn and be respected without targeting student demographics. So I'd love to hear the feedback that the students gave about our most current dress code.
It was largely positive. There, are still areas that they identify themselves, that they would love to see further refinement, but that part of the course is opening up that conversation. But I think they were relieved to see that as well.
Yeah, to echo Anna's comment, I also did the dress code activity in my classroom, and the kids liked our dress code. The students that I had, they thought that it was a pretty good dress code, and I think that's important to acknowledge, because I think that at times some of the fears that have come through in community comment or questioning is that students are going to be taught to hate something or to dislike what their current present is, and I think that. For me, it's about trusting the kids to really actually be able to be strong critical thinkers and reach logical conclusions based off of what they see. And, when they see something from the school that's fair, they say that it's fair, and they like it, and they appreciate the fact that they have it, and they appreciate the fact that they have school leaders that are pushing for that. And then, we move on. It's not really, once again, I said earlier in my final comment, I think from a student perspective, this class really hasn't been very controversial. They just enjoyed talking about these things. They've enjoyed having their voices heard, and it's given them an appreciation for their community. It's given them an appreciation for their school. It's given them an appreciation for their teachers, as we've seen a lot of students say. So I think that's a really, really, really important thing for people to hear and for people to know.
I have a comment. First of all, it's such an engaging topic. We're all kind of on the edge of our chair. But what I love about it is that when you're looking at dress code, whether they like it or not, you've opened up the concept that there are subtle ways of sending a message that you perhaps don't fit in. And so I think that conversation and how nuanced that is for ninth graders is just so amazing and critical. And you could extend it to hair, to Native Americans and their hair, African Americans and their hair, and even going back or to another location, that discrimination still exists. So I love how, we've made progress, but you're really opening up that concept that you have the rule, but then you have the practice, and then you have the inference, and then you have the judgments that are just silent. So I really like how you're opening up that with something really accessible to all kids, dress code. And it's come a long way, by the way, but it's still that concept that underneath the surface of you can wear that, there's a lot to that can be discovered. So thank you.
So last, I guess more of a comment, because I think you answered my question. I was going to ask a question about the unit on justice system. It's obviously it's a very meaty, a meaty unit, but I think all the units are probably pretty meaty, really. And I think in terms of policing, obviously can be a very controversial subject, and I think you answered Catherine's question, which basically. You look at it from a balanced point of view. And I guess my comment overall is that I think that's where I think what I think we want to make sure that we are providing a balanced curriculum, so we understand all points of view of each of these subjects that are reviewed. There are a lot of points of view, and I think you've done that. I think one of the things that's difficult, and I know it was for me as well, when I went through the slides that were sent to us on the specific each of the units and all that stuff. It's hard to know exactly what's being taught just based on those slides alone, right? And so sometimes you may take it as, but this doesn't seem very balanced to me, because it seems to be kind of showing one point of view. Maybe is it really discussing another point of view? It's hard to know whether that is or not necessarily. And I think that's the I would say my takeaway, and from listening to all of you these last two study sessions, I believe that you are providing a balanced point of view, of the curriculum. And I think you're working hard to make sure you do that. And I think that's what's pretty evident to me as I listen to all of you. So thank you very much for today. I appreciate it very much.
So I won't repeat all the praise that you've had. I agree with everything that's been said. I particularly appreciate your sorry, I lost my notes. What I did want to ask, I appreciate your scaffolding that hasn't been mentioned. I've been really impressed by how you present a court case to ninth graders. What I did want to ask you though, is if you talk about intersectionality, which is a big word, a big concept, but I think to me, really is crucial to understanding systems of power. So do you talk about that? And do you use that word? I know it's a big word, but it is an academic word that is well known and well understood.
We do use that word. We use it in our unit 2 on identity. I think we showed at our last meeting examples of the puzzle that students have created. And that's kind of one of the ways that we try to scaffold, well, you're right, it's a very large concept. But to help students understand, we define it and then we practice with it. And so we look at it through, in our classes, I'll talk to tonight, but I believe we do something similar. We first looked at Martin Luther King Jr., who is an accessible figure that many of them have learned about in some capacity prior to ninth grade. And then we learned a little bit deeper and we kind of build this identity web about him from our research, and then they kind of apply it to themselves. They get a lot of practice with the term after defining it to be able to learn how to apply it to historical figures and get a deeper understanding of figures that we've learned a lot about, as well as to themselves, so that they can understand these terms that they may hear floating around to describe themselves or others who are similar to them in some capacity, and understanding how that may or may not apply to them, and what other parts of them make them their own unique human being within these labels that we hear.
Yeah, and just to follow on with that, you talked about internet memes. One of the most annoying to me personally was handicapped, which was said to be hand and capped, a beggar. That is not true. It's handicapped like gold, but it went around and around the internet. It really annoyed me as someone with disabilities. And there are so many terms where if you actually look in the dictionary, which is an academic source, they're misdefined or misused. And people who say you can't, I respect someone, if they don't want to use that term for themselves, that's fine. But when someone says, I can't use that term because it's wrong based on some incorrect internet meme. So I'm sure you have that. So can you give an example and how you dealt with that? Because there's tons of them out there of misdefined words of various complex topics.
For sure. And I think that, we haven't explicitly dealt with head on, demystifying the term handicap. I think that's an interesting one to possibly bring up. If we do talk about, abled and disabled and how that's part of identity and intersectionality surrounding that, especially in unit 2. I think a lot of to kind of get at your broader question about oversimplification, the meme culture, oftentimes we'll introduce things in slideshows. We'll talk about how, people in pop culture, people that students have heard of, whether it's, a rapper like Kanye West or somebody like the Kardashians or anybody a notable politician, how they have said something about a topic, that probably is an oversimplified, view on that topic. And then we spend time looking at and corroborating with scholarly resources to really understand the true kind of depth and complexity of the issue. And I think, one of the ones that we went over in our presentation was, surrounding the origins of the police, in the aftermath of, the death of George Floyd. There was a lot equating, policing solely to slavery, that the origins of policing solely go hand in hand with slavery. It was very common on Twitter, it was very common in meme culture. And it's, it's also just not true factually in terms of the origins of policing in the country. And, we spent time breaking that down in activity to see, where that is true, because obviously slave patrol did play a role in it. We also look at the other factors and the other pieces. So I think there's kind of the approach generally is, why do people think that? If that is a meme, if that is a tweet, if that is whatever, where does that come from? Because it generally comes from some place. There's some story behind it, but also what are the other pieces of information? What are the other sources? Because those are the questions that we really want our kids to be asking. Because at the end of the day, our students need to be autonomous, independent learners when they leave here, and they need to be able to ask themselves, is there another source I could find to prove that this is true or not? Whether it's a meme, whether it's a tweet, they need to be able to ask themselves that question, and they need to know, what credible sources look like, and we try to make sure that we build that into our lessons.
And if I could build on that, I heard you mention about the labels that people may choose do or do not apply to them based on their identity in terms of certain terminology. That's another way we add to the complexity of the discussion, is not simplifying it down into you refer to X group and Y way, but acknowledging that there may be multiple terms that folks may choose to apply to themselves. And what's important is also to listen to the person you're speaking with. If they choose to use Black over African American, then use that with them. If they use African American over Black, that's the right term. That there's not necessarily a correct answer, but listening and humanizing other people and hearing what their perspectives are.
Thank you. That's actually exactly what I wanted to hear.
Anything else? Well, again, thank you. Terrific job. We look forward to seeing you back here next year to tell us how things are going. I expect that they will go well. Maybe we'll have a big ice cream social for the year.
I think we have to. We gotta agendize that one.
I do want to say that you guys signed up for a difficult job, not just with your students, but with the community. And I so appreciate your being here and doing that. And thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. That's all that's on our agenda, folks. May I have a motion to adjourn?
I was that we adjourn.
Second.
Moved by Catherine, seconded by Esme. All in favor, indicate by raising your hand or saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, motion carries 5-0. We're adjourned.
Have a nice dinner.